Hello and welcome to talk 9 of the Sermon on the Mount Digging Deeper series. This week we're thinking about salt and light. With the Beatitudes, Jesus told us what life is like in the kingdom of heaven. How blessed we are as we are comforted, inherited the kingdom, filled with righteousness, shown mercy, see God and can be called the sons of God, and are reminded for the second time that ours is the kingdom of heaven. It is unfortunate that we get a heading break between verses 12 and 13 because there is a direct continuation from the previous Beatitudes into the salt and light comments. These few verses conclude the Beatitudes rather than commence anything new. Verses 9 to 12 refer to persecution and suffering for the sake of righteousness. And here, in verses 13 to 16, the listeners and readers are told how to become beacons that would lead to their persecution and suffering, but let others see righteousness, the purpose of it all. The Beatitudes describe the essential character of a citizen of the kingdom of heaven: meek, seekers after righteousness, merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers, and so on. Now, the salt and light in it indicate their influence for good in the community, the new covenant witness of the people of God. Take care to see what Jesus said. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. These are gifts that come with the blessedness and being a member of the kingdom of heaven. As in the first and last beatitude, there is now no "you will be." For a believer, there is no choice in this. You are salt and light. The only choice is how you respond to who you are. Do you lose your saltiness or turn your light off? Remember what Paul told the Colossians in chapter 4, verse 6. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Never forget what Jesus is doing in this sermon. He was changing the way people behave, react, think, and relate to each other and to God. He was teaching them to seek righteousness through repentance. He was telling what life is like in the kingdom of heaven. The job of Jesus as hearers, then and now, is to transform society and show the kingdom of heaven. To do this, Jesus informs us how we should behave as members of the kingdom. We are to be salt and light. There is a change in these verses 11 to 16 from the they in the Beatitudes to you. Although Jesus is talking specifically to the disciples, this is for all disciples of all ages, and that includes us as we go out into the world as heralds of a new covenant. We are being told that we need to be outward focused, inviting people into the kingdom, even though this will bring us opposition and persecution. Let's think about salt to begin with. This is not the first biblical reference to salt. Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt, and salt had been part of all grain offerings. Perhaps more significantly, in 2 Chronicles 13 verse 5, we read, "Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt?" Salt is a significant item. One of salt's general qualities is that it is essentially different from whatever food it is put into, making sure that you notice it or its absence. So it is with the disciples of Jesus. We are to make a difference wherever we are. Then, two of salt's major attributes are its ability to arrest decay and to act as an antiseptic. However, to do that effectively, it needs to be rubbed into and become an integral part of whatever it is put into. Christians equally need to be integrated into their communities to bring about any change. Believers need to be active in all areas of society: social care, politics, sport, education, industry, and anything else you can think of. Then comes the warning. You can lose your saltiness, which makes you worthless. If the believer has become one of the world, they are then no use to the kingdom of heaven. Just like salt, our power lies in that we are different, and this gives us the ability to change what we have been put into. Christian saltiness is the Christian character mentioned earlier, portrayed in the Beatitudes, and this must be retained if we are to be used to Jesus and to the kingdom. Put simply, we need to be righteous, and righteousness is a gift from God. So we work our way into society, stop the decay, and then what? We are to show ourselves as the light of the world. No longer are we to be a negative influence, but become a positive influence. So let's think about light. With the combination here of salt and light, and the many light references in Matthew from Isaiah, especially chapters 40 to 66, Jesus is showing both the new covenant and his eschatological claims. The introduction of salt and light, along with the introduction of Isaiah 40 to 66, show a biblical line and hope of a new covenant time when God will return and bring his comfort and beauty into the whole world. By extension, Jesus' disciples are likewise heralds of this new life. The promise of coming persecution puts this in the context of the prophets who were heralds of the new covenant. See Matthew 5:12. The listeners would relate to this. We need to. The Tanakh has reference to the Israelites being light to the Gentiles. My justice will become a light to the nations, Isaiah 51:4. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light, Isaiah again. Arise, shine, for your light has come, Isaiah 61. I will make you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth. And now one from Matthew's Gospel, who already quoted Isaiah in reference to light, now says, the people living, walking in darkness have seen a great light. Here is the suffering servant bringing light and grace into the world. Later, in John 8 verse 12, Jesus tells the people that he is the light of the world. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Precisely what is promised here in the Sermon on the Mount. By extension, this is now in the sermon being extended to the disciples and ultimately to all believers. Paul refers to light in this context many times. For example, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 6, Paul writes, for God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light and the knowledge of God's glory. Or 1 Thessalonians 5:5, you are children of the light. This takes us back to the Beatitudes. You are flourishing, blessed when you enter the kingdom and have the opportunity to be salt and light in your community. Notice that there is no condemnation here. It is more that if you lose your saltiness or hide your light under a bushel, then you are not much use to the kingdom of heaven. But nowhere does Jesus say, I will reject you. As we get the overall picture, we see that throughout the Old Testament, Light symbolises many overlapping ideas. For example, revelation, instruction, law, righteousness, and God's presence. Disciples are to be a light to the world, fulfilling Isaiah 42:6, which says, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will keep you and make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles. Then, moving into the New Testament, Paul follows this. In the letter to the Ephesians 5:8, he tells the Gentiles, For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the world. Live as children of light, for the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. Salt of the earth and light of the world is what is expected of all followers of the way today, Jew or Gentile. Both the salt and light metaphors are communicating the same idea, that Jesus' disciples and followers are now the heralds of the new and lasting covenant being effected by Jesus. The conclusion to this introductory of Matthew 5:16 brings a powerful exhortation. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The whole of the sermon relates to the call to repentance and growing in righteousness. Repentance is about the whole person turning back to God and devotedness to Him, whilst righteousness is being morally right and in a right relationship with the Lord. Righteousness is a key of the sermon being whole person behaviour that accords with God's nature and will and coming kingdom. Immediately prior to the sermon, we have two examples of this righteousness. Joseph, firstly, in not condemning Mary. For this, he is declared righteous and is portrayed as mercy, not justice. Joseph is being commended for his forgiveness and grace. Whole person behaviour in accord with God's nature, will, and coming kingdom. Jesus allows himself to be baptized by John, an action in accord with God's nature, will, and coming kingdom. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness, Jesus said. This is the whole person behaviour, further developed by Jesus in the gospel, that people following God should imitate. For example, Jesus says, For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. And he illustrates it with a story in Matthew 21, the story of the prodigal son. Then he shows it in his own actions, Matthew 26. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet, not as I will, but as you will. And this then continues through the New Testament. In James we read, You see that his, Abraham's, faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. This is crucial kingdom entry behaviour for all, not optional or only for the super spiritual. As we next move on into the main body of the sermon, we will see much more about repentance and righteousness, and we need to remember, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.